Hey there, it's me Eden. Welcome to Crossdressing Adventure Stories. Today I'm going to share with you cross-dressing adventure story called Classmates Turned Me into a Sissy, Part 1, brought to you by Pamela. So, if you're new to the channel, then please consider subscribing and be a part of our inclusive community. At lunchtime recess one day in late spring, Blake casually strolled to a large garden of rose bushes planted on the far side of the schoolyard. The other 8th grade boys normally never went there. Rather they hung out near the school building playing ball games or else huddled together in noisy groups teasing each other and roughhousing as boys are wont to do. Normally Blake would be with them, but this day he was tired of the nasty put-downs and teasing from the other boys. This had become a problem lately, ever since Mr. Grady the science teacher had pointed out to the whole class how well Blake had done on his science fair project. In fact, Blake had been a state runner-up that year. Some of the rougher boys in the class had taken to threatening and taunting him, calling him a snob and a nerd. It felt like a good idea to cool things with the guys for a while, so he had decided to walk over to the opposite side of the schoolyard away from everyone else. Finding the rose bushes had been somewhat of an accident, but he found himself attracted to them and had walked over to inspect them closely. He was amazed at the many different colors of the flowers and the strong smells. He leaned over at one flower on each one of the different varieties of roses and sniffed deeply. The scents were so intoxicating that he was startled back to consciousness by the sudden sound of Clifford yelling at him, "Look at the sissy boy smelling the flowers. What a little girl." At this, Blake noticed that the whole group of boys he normally hung out with were grouped around him laughing at him and making other nasty comments. He blushed deeply and tried to say he just liked the smell of the roses, but the guys were really into ragging on him, and the more he said the more they teased him. Blake felt tears welling up in his eyes and he did the best he could to suppress them from becoming visible. Unfortunately Clifford and another particularly tough guy, Roy, saw the gleam in his eyes and started to then also call him a crybaby. Roy began shoving Blake, which Blake couldn't do anything about since Roy could easily beat him up if he gave him an excuse to do so. While this was going on, a group of 5 of the girls in their class came up to the boys and started yelling at Roy and Clifford and the other boys to leave poor Blake alone. Karen, who was widely acknowledged to be the prettiest girl in the 8th grade, scolded the boys. "We saw everything. You boys are just awful and vicious." All Blake did was admire the beautiful pretty roses, which if you had any brains or maturity like he does, then you would enjoy them too. At this the girls surrounded Blake and began sniffing the roses also. While some of the boys were silenced by Karen, since they all at one time or another had fantasized about dating her, Clifford continued on saying, "Just like I said, Blake is one of the girls now. What a cute little fairy sissy boy. I bet tomorrow he will come to school in a dress." The boys fell down laughing at this one and Blake was so angry and upset he didn't know what to do. He was afraid to leave the girls since as long as Karen was there he felt safe. Yet as long as he let the girls protect him he was inviting many more days of teasing from the guys. One of the other girls, Amy, spoke up loudly, "Clifford and Roy and the rest of you are just so impossible. Just leave Blake alone. Before any of you dare to touch him, you will have to contend with me first." At this, Amy bared her long sharp nails, as if daring anyone to come forward and attack. Amy was a bit tall as a girl, but very athletic with a trim lithe body and a full set of rounded breasts which were shown off by a tight-fitting t-shirt. Blake winced at this, since it was now clear he didn't have the courage to do what the girls could do. Amy, who was just the same height as him and perhaps a bit lighter, was not afraid to stand up and defend him. Luckily, just at that moment the bell sounded signaling the end of recess and the boys turned to go away. However, Clifford got the last words saying, "After school, Blake, you won't have your other girls to protect you." Blake gulped in fear as he walked slowly back to the school building surrounded by the 5 girls. Once the boys were out of earshot, Karen said to Kathy and Janet, who were next to her, "We have to do something to protect Blake this afternoon. We can't let those dumb boys beat him up for such a stupid reason." Kathy and the other girls all agreed. Kathy then said, "Well, why not have Blake go with us after school today? We were all planning to get together at my house anyway for our weekly meeting." "Well, I guess he could come for at least a little time, until our meeting starts," added Karen. Blake had overheard this exchange and said, "That's very kind of you, but what meeting are you referring to? I don't want to intrude." "Today is our meeting of the Girls Only Club," Karen said, "which is a name we give to the 5 of us. We meet each week at Kathy's house to talk about all kinds of things, some girl things but also music and art, you know." "Oh, then I really am out of place there." "Don't worry. The meeting usually doesn't start until 4 o'clock. By then you could safely go home." "I can't thank you all enough," Blake exclaimed. But then added, "But how can you stand me, if you are not afraid of the guys and I am? I mean, Amy wasn't afraid to fight Clifford or Roy and I was." At this a new burst of tears started from his eyes. Karen and the other girls stopped a minute and surrounded Blake, patting him gently on the shoulders. "Now listen, Blake," Kathy said, "we think it's okay if some boys are not as strong as some girls. You have other talents which are nice, and we accept you for that." Hearing this comforted Blake tremendously, and he suddenly felt excited about the chance to play a little with such nice girls after school. He really believed that they would protect him without also looking down on him, and that was what mattered most. When he reached the building, he excitedly ran ahead to the classroom. The boys wouldn't dare start a fight near one of the teachers. He couldn't believe how nice the girls were, and that Karen and the other girls, Kathy, Janet, Amy and Penny, who were also among the prettiest in the whole school, would take the time to be nice to him. He had always thought the girls were more mature than the guys, and this was a good lesson on how true that was. At the end of the school day, as Blake foresaw, the guys had assembled across the street from the school entrance to await his exit. But the girls had also held to their promise to protect him, so after a brief scene in which he was teased anew by Clifford and Roy, and even some of the smaller kids pushed him a little, the guys left to go play baseball. The guys could have gotten him if they really wanted, but they didn't want to do something to get on the bad side of Karen, Kathy, and the other girls. In fact, most of the guys would have liked nothing better than to go steady with any of the 5 girls, each being cute and pretty in their own way. One of the main topics of conversation of the guys had always been to try to figure out ways for one of them to get a date with one of the girls so that they could feel her up. In fact, there had been some dating, and some claims that they had gotten sex off of the girls, but most of the guys just assumed that this was fantasy. The 5 girls walked along toward Kathy's house with Blake trailing behind. They talked rapidly and excitedly about all kinds of things that Blake didn't know much about, who other girls were dating, some new songs they just heard on the radio, things going on at the mall and so forth. He felt more and more out of place, and finally said to them, "Look, the guys have all gone away to play ball. Maybe I should just go home since I am sure I can get there safely now." Kathy spoke up immediately and said, "We won't hear of that. The boys could be lurking anywhere to gang up on you. In fact, look down the street there." She pointed up the block behind them, and Blake could see a couple of boys standing looking toward their direction. "I think they are spying on us," You come along with us to Kathy's house like we planned, and we'll send you on home at 4. It looked like Kathy was right, so Blake agreed to the plan, and contented himself to walk along behind the girls as they went the remaining few blocks to Kathy's house. When they arrived there, Mrs. O'Connor, Kathy's mom, had cookies and milk waiting for the girls on the kitchen table. She was surprised to see Blake, but after hearing what had happened with the boys, she commended the girls on their good deed, and made Blake feel very much welcome in the house. She poured him a glass of milk also, and offered him some cookies. When the girls and Blake were done eating, they went upstairs to Kathy's large bedroom suite. Blake was impressed by the lovely feminine decor, which included 2 love seats, a sofa, a large bed with a white and pink bedspread, light blue wallpaper with little pink flowers. On one wall was a large color photograph of some unbelievably muscular bodybuilder posed with his huge biceps sticking out. He wore just a little Speedo bathing suit which barely hid what appeared to be a huge member inside. Apart from this, there were no other bows to popular culture. 2 of the girls sat down on the sofa, 2 on one of the love seats and Kathy on the other. This left Blake standing awkwardly until Kathy told him to not be shy and sit down next to her. Kathy had on a flaring light blue skirt which spread out a bit on the seat so that when Blake sat down it was gently touching his pants leg. The girls were smiling and quite excited with their feeling of accomplishment for how they had handled the events of the afternoon. "I can't believe how dumb those stupid boys are," said Penny. She was the quietest of the girls, and known in the classroom for being very smart. What are they trying to prove by picking on someone who they obviously could beat up? Clifford or Roy ought to fight each other, then that would be a contest. I have always enjoyed your contributions in class, Blake. You should be very proud of your accomplishments, and certainly you should enjoy the roses anytime you want. The girls laughed at this and Amy said, "Look, Penny, you made Blake blush." Blake hid his face in his hands while laughing, and then everyone laughed anew very hard. Karen finally said, "As we have discussed many times together, the boys have only one thing on their stupid minds, which seems to be to try and feel us up or go even further. Never anything about our personalities or thoughts in our heads. The only exception, Blake, has been you. In fact, at last week's meeting we had been talking about how we wish all the boys could be like you." Blake felt a deep joy in his heart. No matter what, whether he was to wake up tomorrow and find that this was all a dream, at least for just this one precious afternoon, he felt like he belonged. He said, after some hesitation, "I really like you girls, and I am so happy that I got to play with you today." At this, Karen got up and walked over and gave Blake a kiss on the cheek. She kneeled down in front of him and put her hands on his shoulders and looked into his eyes and said, "Blake, we really like you too, and we hope that you will play with us many times more. From now on, let us never think again about those ugly boys out there, and let us all just have fun together now." All the girls shouted their agreement, and then they all began talking together about different things. They enjoyed hearing Blake's thoughts about many topics, such as opera, of which he was a big fan, and especially ballet. When he was older he planned to take lessons, but not now, since his mom and dad couldn't really afford it and he wasn't too sure that they would accept it either. He wasn't gay, but he thought that they wouldn't understand his love for the beautiful graceful motions of the dancers and wanting to do it himself. It was approaching 4 o'clock and the girls were talking about the upcoming wedding of Kathy's sister, Beth. In fact, Beth was engaged to the hunk whose picture hung on the wall, which thus explained the incongruity of this photo with the other decor. The girls in the club were to be bridesmaids at the wedding, and the past weekend they had gone to a shop to be fitted for their gowns. Kathy was very excited because her gown had been the first to be finished and her mom had brought it home the previous afternoon. Janet and Amy together said, "Oh, Kathy, show it to us." Kathy got up to go to her mother's room to get the dress to show the girls. While she was gone, Blake started to feel like he was intruding again. After all, the wedding concerned just the girls. Being very conscious of the time, and thinking that they might be too polite to tell him to leave, he said, "Well, I guess it is 4 and I don't want to get in the way of your meeting." The girls appeared to have not heard him, and he was just about to repeat this when just that second, Kathy came running back in the room carrying a large box. She put it down on her bed, and opened it up, taking out a beautiful roughly pink and white dress, covered with little pink lace flowers and a wide white skirt, underneath which was many layers of soft pink crinolines. Totally taken by surprise, Blake let out an audible gasp of excitement, and then, before he knew what he was saying, said, "How wonderfully pretty and exciting your dress is, Kathy. Oh, it's just marvelous. I can't believe how pretty and gorgeous it is. Oh God, I just love it. I think it is just so nice, and you are so lucky to get to wear it." Kathy beamed at Blake, and the other girls fell silent and took in the moment. Once again Blake was blushing as he realized how excited he had become over a dress. Oh, he thought, boys should not be so taken in by dresses, and they are going to think I am a sissy. Feeling embarrassed, he quickly stood up and began walking to the door. "It's just now 4 o'clock, and I really ought to be going so you girls can get on with your meeting." Janet said, "Blake, it's okay to like the dress. We all do, too. You should have seen us at the store, we all fell instantly in love with it, just like you did. Please don't be embarrassed, and please sit down and stay a bit longer." Blake didn't know what to do, and so he carefully retook his seat on the sofa. Karen said, "I think Blake is right. It is about time we started our club meeting. However, as president of the Girls Only Club, I know I am speaking on behalf of everyone when I say that we need to do some serious thinking about how we can fit you into the club also." All the girls loudly clapped their hands in agreement, and Blake was taken by surprise. Of course you realize that the Girls Only Club is, as its name implies, for girls only. We set up the club this way mainly because we really couldn't stand the immaturity of boys, who can never talk intelligently about any subject, and only care about our bodies. You, on the other hand, are so different, that we can really see that it would be a great benefit to the club to have you as a member. The discussions at our meetings would be ever so much more interesting. Unfortunately, however, rules are rules, and the charter of our club strictly requires that only girls can be in the club. However, I would like you to answer just one question for us right now. Blake nodded in agreement, "Sure." Pretending that we didn't have the girls only rule, "Would you want to join the club?" Karen said slowly. Without hesitation, Blake said, "Oh, would I? It would be the most wonderful thing that could happen to me." Upon hearing this, the girls whispered among themselves for a second, and finally Amy said, "We would like to discuss some things amongst us club members. Could you wait downstairs until we call for you? It shouldn't be more than 15 minutes or so. Maybe we can find some sort of way to make us all happy." Blake agreed, and feeling truly elated walked out of the room, closing the door behind him. He couldn't imagine what the girls would be discussing, but he hoped more that he had thought possible to be given the chance to join the club. Blake nervously walked downstairs to sit in the living room while awaiting the girls. He never would have imagined when this day began that he would be a guest in Kathy O'Connor's house, and playing with the most attractive group of girls in the school. When he got downstairs, he walked into the living room and found Mrs. O'Connor sitting there. She greeted him warmly and said, "On your way home now? Do you think it will be safe? I could drive you if you are afraid." Blake shyly said, "Oh, no ma'am, I think I can get home okay. But actually, I'm not yet leaving. The girls are upstairs having some discussion, and when they are done, I can go up again." Mrs. O'Connor put on a puzzled expression. Blake observed that she was a strikingly attractive woman. About 45 with long blonde hair. She was wearing a simple A-line dress which gracefully reflected her curves. As she sat in the chair with her legs crossed, he saw that she was wearing stockings and high-heeled shoes. She said, "Well, why don't you sit down and chat with me until the girls are ready? Come sit over here." She indicated a spot near her on the sofa. As he sat down, Blake noted the gentle fragrance of her perfume and felt somewhat overwhelmed by the intensity of her womanly presence. "So what is it the girls are discussing without you?" "Something to do with maybe allowing me into their club." "Oh, that's strange. I thought they called it the girls-only club." "Yes, that is the problem they are working on." Blake realized that this sounded awkward but didn't know what else to say. "Well?" Mrs. O'Connor asked, showing genuine curiosity. "Oh, you mean, why would a boy want to join?" Blake suddenly felt very embarrassed, and started to stammer, I, and couldn't find any words. Mrs. O'Connor smiled at him. "Those girls are quite a group." Blake felt inadequate and confused. What did Mrs. O'Connor mean by this remark? Luckily, just then the phone rang and Mrs. O'Connor got up to answer it. She came back after a few minutes and said, it was the florist for Beth's wedding. Endless details and problems. But well worth it, I guess, since Beth is so happy. Blake said, "Oh, I saw the picture of her boyfriend in Kathy's room." "Oh, that funny thing. Isn't it silly of him to be posed like Arnold Schwarzenegger? Those muscles are something else, aren't they?" Blake looked down at his lap and tried to smile. His arms were thin and graceful, with barely any bulge if he flexed them. He told himself he would have to get a weight set and see if he could develop some muscles like Brad had. Mrs. O'Connor seemed to read what was on his mind. Not all girls like those big bulging muscles on a guy. But you know that Beth, being a beauty queen and even winning some pageants over the years, fits in well with a ruggedly handsome man. They make such a beautiful couple together. She reached over and took a framed picture off a table and handed it to Blake to see. In it was a color picture of Beth and Brad at the beach. Brad in his little Speedo was standing holding up a surfboard on one side, while on the other was an extraordinarily voluptuous woman in a tiny little pink bikini, holding on to Brad. Her huge shapely breasts were barely contained in the bra top. Blake said, "Wow, she is beautiful." And after a moment, "I mean just like you and Karen." Mrs. O'Connor laughed at this, saying, "Thank you. I guess all the ladies in our family are nice looking. It is so kind of you to say that I still have attractions." Blake found himself blushing once again. "Here, let me give you a little kiss for being so nice. Come closer." Mrs. O'Connor indicated that he should slide right next to her on the sofa so she could give him a kiss. He slowly moved closer and she put her arm around him and drew him up to her body. She looked a second in his eyes and then gave him a little kiss on the cheek. Blake felt his chest against her breasts and his arm touching her dress. He couldn't believe how happy he felt. When she released him, he was sitting very tightly against her and felt the warmth of her body. "You are such a dear. Such a fine young man, and I am glad that Kathy has found you as a new friend." She sat there looking a bit wistful. After a long pause in which Blake felt close to tears of happiness, she said, "Having 2 daughters, I always wished to have had a son. A son who would be genteel and kind. Like you are. You know, before my husband died suddenly in the plane crash, we had talked about having another child, mainly to see what a boy would be like." I didn't know Kathy's dad had died. I am sorry. It was many years ago now. I'm sorry to have brought up the subject. Now let me tell you about the big wedding. When is it? Blake asked. It's 3 weeks from this Saturday. There will be about 200 guests and it will be held at the Old Episcopal Church on Main Street. The wedding party is at the country club. We have 6 bridesmaids, the girls-only club members plus Brad's young cousin from Minneapolis. Wow. It sounds great. Yes, everyone is going to look splendid. Beth bought the most exquisite gown and all the bridesmaids have very pretty dresses. Yes, I saw one upstairs. Oh, yes, Kathy and the girls are very excited about wearing the dresses together. It was so much silly fun and confusion down at the dress shop buying them. Blake and Mrs. O'Connor turned their heads when they heard the footsteps of Kathy coming down the stairs. She came into the living room and said, "Well, you two look really comfy. I'm glad you have become friends, because I am hoping that we will be seeing a lot of Blake. Anyway, Mom, can we borrow him for a moment since the club has some important business to discuss with him? Blake, I do hope to see you again. Now run along and take care of this mysterious business with the girls." Blake thanked Mrs. O'Connor profusely for their chat and went with Karen up the stairs to her room. That's all for today. See you in the next video. Till then, take care. Oh yes, please like and subscribe to my channel. And also share your feedback, it really means a lot to me.